Hey guys, tonight we settle into a soft, dimly lit room where the past creeps in like a slow-moving fog, bringing with it whispers of strange diseases and medieval magic. You're tucked in, maybe under a cozy blanket, the kind that feels just heavy enough to quiet your thoughts. Perfect for drifting off. Imagine yourself wandering dusty streets centuries ago, where the air is thick with suspicion and sickness, and the line between science and sorcery is as blurred as the flickering shadows cast by candlelight. You probably won't survive this trip as a healthy, modern human. Medieval diseases were as ruthless as the myths that grew around them. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who's joining this sleepy journey from where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down narrow cobblestone lanes, past timber-framed houses that seem ready to topple, clutching your cloak tightly as the chill evening air nips your skin. The Middle Ages, roughly the 5th to the 15th century, were a world where the threat of illness was as constant as the rising sun. And yet, no one knew why people got sick, or how to stop it. Instead, they invented stories, rituals, and remedies that sound more like fantasy than medicine. The strange relationship between disease and magic is woven tightly into the fabric of this era. One mainstream fact you'll want to tuck into your mental pouch. Medieval Europe suffered recurring outbreaks of the bubonic plague, famously known as the Black Death, which wiped out about a third of the continent's population in the 14th century. It was a catastrophe so massive, it redefined society, economics, and how people understood life and death. But the cause? Fleas carried by rats, tiny vermin, yes, but also viewed as possible agents of dark magic by many. People believed curses or evil spirits were at work because germs? That concept was centuries away. You might find it quirky that people sometimes wore amulets or charms to ward off disease. Tiny bags filled with herbs, bits of bone, or even hair from saints, believed to create a magical shield against sickness. It's easy to imagine you'd look rather ridiculous wandering the streets covered in dangling charms and strange symbols. Yet, for those living through terrifying epidemics, this was as reasonable as anything. Historians still argue whether medieval people's belief in magic actually helped or hindered public health. Did relying on charms and rituals give false hope, or did the calming effect of belief actually improve people's chances? It's an open question that blurs the lines between psychology, faith, and early medicine. Imagine walking into a village square where a crowd gathers, whispering about the mysterious illness spreading like wildfire. You hear a healer muttering incantations over a steaming pot, mixing strange herbs while reciting prayers. Nearby, a group of children play, oblivious to the fear etched on the faces of adults. The village is a fragile place where science, superstition, and survival collide in unpredictable ways. This uneasy mixture of dread and hope shapes every step of your journey through medieval disease and magic. You're about to learn why the weird, the wonderful, and the terrifying were all part of the same story. You walk into the thick, humid air of a medieval town just as a fresh wave of the plague begins to sweep through. The smell hits you first. A heavy, sickly scent of decay mixed with unwashed bodies and wood smoke. The Black Death, as it's called now, arrives not with a polite knock, but like a roaring wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Streets once bustling with traders and children are now eerily silent, punctuated only by the distant tolling of funeral bells. You can almost taste the panic, thick and choking, like a poison worse than the disease itself. The plague's story is a grim one, and yet strangely captivating. In the mid-1300s, this mysterious sickness, bubonic plague, wiped out nearly 30% to 60% of Europe's population in just a few years. People noticed swollen, blackened lumps on the body, hence the black in Black Death. But understanding how it spread was far beyond their reach. Instead, they spun their own dark tales. Fleas on rats became tiny agents of malevolent magic, spreading evil as if they were sorcerers' familiars. Imagine villagers in threadbare robes trying to swat invisible demons while hoping their prayers would hold. A mainstream fact to hold on to here: the bubonic plague is caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, transmitted mainly through flea bites. But this fact is centuries away from being discovered. Back then, the science was replaced by superstition, fear, and the desperate search for scapegoats. Jews, foreigners, or anyone different were accused of conjuring the plague through dark magic or poison. This sadly led to horrific persecutions and massacres, as people sought to blame something or someone other than the invisible fleas. On the quirkier side, some towns tried bizarre cures that included things like smelling strong spices or carrying live pigeons tied to your wrists, believed to draw out the poison. Others wore long robes filled with sweet-smelling herbs, hoping to shield themselves from the bad air or miasma that was thought to carry the disease. This idea of miasma, or corrupted air, was a dominant medical theory, because if you can't see germs, maybe the problem is stinky air, right? Historians still argue whether the miasma theory actually helped limit plague spread indirectly, forcing people outdoors and away from crowded, stuffy homes, or just gave them false security while the fleas happily did their work. It's an intriguing debate, blending public health and medieval beliefs. You imagine a plague doctor, that eerie figure with a bird-like mask stuffed with aromatic herbs, trudging through streets lined with death. Their outfit looks more like a costume for a masquerade than protection, but it's an early attempt at disease control, mixing superstition with practical attempts to filter air. People were desperate to believe in something, anything, that might save them. The plague's grip was so tight, so merciless, that it rewrote history. Cities emptied, economies collapsed, and the very fabric of society began to unravel. But beneath the horror, there were strange flickers of hope, new ways of thinking about disease and humanity that would eventually lead out of the darkness. You feel the weight of it all, the eerie silence of towns that lived and died by superstition and survival. You find yourself on the outskirts of a village shrouded in mist, where a chilling silence hangs heavier than the morning fog. Here, the air carries a different kind of fear, the fear of leprosy, the disease that brands its victims as outcasts, not just of society, but of humanity itself. The very word leper conjures images of isolation, trembling hands, and whispered prayers from behind barred gates. You step closer and see the lepers' colony, a fenced-off place where those afflicted are sent to live apart, surrounded by superstition and sorrow. Leprosy, or Hansen's disease as modern doctors call it, was one of the most dreaded illnesses of medieval times. It wasn't just the physical symptoms, disfiguring sores and nerve damage, but the social death that came with it. Lepers were forced to wear bells or clappers so that healthy people could hear them coming and stay away. Imagine the loneliness of a person condemned to live on the edge of town, their only companions the barking dogs and the cold wind. It's a haunting scene, one that still lingers in collective memory. A solid historical fact to hold close. Leprosy is caused by a slow-growing bacterium called Mycobacterium leprae. It's actually much less contagious than people feared, and with today's medicine, completely treatable. But back then, the disease was surrounded by spiritual dread. Many believed it was a punishment for sin or a mark of demonic possession. Lepers were thought to be cursed, their condition a visible sign of moral decay. Here's a quirky tidbit. Leper colonies often had their own rules, rituals, and even miniature economies. Some colonies issued their own coins or tokens, allowing lepers to trade without risking contamination of regular currency. You can almost picture the medieval leper carefully dropping a coin into a basket at the market, a mix of fear and hope in their eyes. Historians still argue whether the social isolation of lepers was purely based on fear, or if it actually slowed the disease's spread. Did society's harsh measures save lives, or just deepen suffering? This is a question wrapped in layers of medical, social, and religious complexity. The idea of disease as a visible mark of sin adds a surreal layer to your walk. You pass a chapel where a priest blesses a group of lepers, murmuring prayers meant to cleanse not just the body, but the soul. The spiritual and physical are inseparable in this world. Healing is as much about faith as it is about the flesh. It's a delicate balance between mercy and fear, compassion and ostracism. Leprosi's legacy is one of isolation and misunderstanding, but also of endurance. Those who lived through it carried a stigma as heavy as any physical pain, and you can almost hear the echoes of their silent struggles in the cold stone walls of those old colonies. As you move away, you catch sight of a faded sign warning, "Unclean," a grim reminder that in medieval eyes, disease and morality were tightly entwined. One could not be separated from the other. And with that, you step back into the broader story of strange diseases and the magic they inspired. You step into a dimly lit chamber where the air smells faintly metallic, like old pennies left in a damp drawer. A wooden table holds an assortment of bowls, knives, and strange instruments that look part medical tools, part ritual objects. The faint drip of blood echoes as a healer, or perhaps a barber surgeon, prepares for a procedure that's been trusted for centuries. Bloodletting. You watch as a leather strap is wrapped tightly around an arm and a lancet is poised to make a careful incision. This was medicine, or magic depending on who you asked. Bloodletting was one of the most popular and enduring cures in medieval Europe. The idea was simple. Illness was caused by an imbalance of the four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. And by draining some blood, the body could be set right. You probably won't survive this treatment unscathed if you tried it today, but back then it was as common as drinking water. Kings, peasants, and priests alike submitted to the ritual, hoping for relief. A basic historical fact to pin down. Bloodletting's roots go back to ancient Greece and Hippocrates, but it flourished in medieval medicine because it was tightly bound with spiritual and physical beliefs. Medieval doctors believed that by releasing bad blood, they were also purging evil spirits or curses that caused illness. The line between science and magic blurred in every cut. Here's a quirky detail. Sometimes bloodletting was done by leeches, those slimy little vampires, which were seen as a gentler, more natural alternative to cutting. It sounds a bit gross to modern ears, but leeches were once prescribed by the hundreds for various ailments. You might be glad you never had a swarm of those hanging off your arm in the middle of winter. Historians still argue whether bloodletting actually did any harm or good overall. Some say it weakened patients unnecessarily. Others think the ritual itself offered psychological comfort, much like a placebo. It's a classic example of how belief shaped medieval healthcare. The patient's faith in the cure could be as powerful as the cure itself. You imagine a healer, perhaps with a grim expression but careful hands, explaining that the color and flow of blood were signs of health or disease. A form of diagnosis mixed with a ritualistic show. The patient, wrapped in thick woolen blankets, endures the discomfort in silence, hoping for a miracle. The healer's words echo in the stone room, filled with incense and whispered prayers. This practice, bizarre to us now, shaped centuries of medical thought and only fell out of favor in the 19th century, making you wonder how many more strange rituals might still be lurking in modern medicine, just waiting to be uncovered. Bloodletting is a vivid reminder that healing has always been as much about ritual and belief as it is about science. And as you leave the chamber, you remember the sick town squares and leper colonies, places where hope and fear met in the messy business of staying alive. You step out into a misty forest clearing where the scent of wild herbs mingles with the sharp tang of smoke from a small fire. A figure stands nearby, a woman draped in a cloak embroidered with symbols, carefully mixing a bubbling potion. She is both healer and feared witch, depending on who's watching. Around her, whispers swirl like the smoke. Some call her a savior, others a devil's servant. Devils. Here, in this hazy twilight, the roles of witch and healer twist together in a way that would make even the most skeptical raise an eyebrow. Witches in medieval times weren't always the broom-riding villains of fairy tales. Often, they were women, sometimes men, who used herbs, chants, and folk wisdom to heal the sick or protect against disease. The boundary between healing magic and harmful sorcery was razor thin, shaped by fear and ignorance. A soothing salve might be seen as a blessing one day, a curse the next. You might shiver to think how a single misplaced word or misfortune could tip someone from trusted healer to hunted heretic. Here's a mainstream fact. The infamous witch trials that swept across Europe from the 15th century onward were driven by a mix of social, religious, and political forces, with accusations often linked to illness and misfortune. If a village was struck by plague or crop failure, someone, usually a vulnerable woman, might be blamed for casting a malicious spell. The line between medicine and magic was dangerously blurred. On a quirky note, some accused witches actually practiced what we'd now call herbal medicine, using plants like mandrake, belladonna, or henbane, which have powerful effects and dangerous side effects. It's no wonder their remedies were both revered and feared. A potion brewed from nightshade could ease pain or cause hallucinations, depending on dosage and intent. Historians still argue whether the label of witch was mostly a tool for social control or a genuine fear of supernatural harm. Were these healers mostly scapegoats caught in waves of hysteria, or did some really wield a feared, mysterious power? This question continues to fascinate scholars. Imagine sitting beside the fire, watching the healer chant softly, her fingers deftly mixing herbs while the shadows dance. You feel a strange calm, as if the magic in the air might just hold the power to protect or destroy. This blend of hope, fear, and mystery is what made medieval medicine such a delicate dance. As you leave the clearing behind, the scent of herbs lingers, a faint reminder that even in darkness, people sought light and relief in the strange overlap of magic and healing. You find yourself in a bustling medieval town square just as dusk settles, lanterns flickering to life and casting long shadows. Suddenly, a strange sound rises above the murmurs of the crowd, a frantic rhythmic tapping of feet. People begin to join in, a handful at first, then dozens, then hundreds, caught up in an uncontrollable frenzy of dancing. This isn't a festival or a celebration. It's the eerie spectacle known as the Dancing Plague, a bizarre and baffling event where people dance themselves into exhaustion, sometimes to death. The Dancing Plague, or Dancing Mania, was a mysterious phenomenon that struck Europe several times during the Middle Ages. Groups of people would start dancing erratically for days or weeks, unable to stop despite collapsing from sheer exhaustion. One famous outbreak in 1518, Strasbourg saw hundreds caught up in the madness. No one knew why this happened, but it was terrifying. Was it a case of mass hysteria, a curse, or some sort of magical possession? Here's a solid historical fact. The Dancing Plague is well documented, with reports from chroniclers of the time describing its spread and devastating effects. It's one of the stranger pages in medical history, where physical symptoms met the inexplicable. For a quirky twist, some historians have suggested that ergot poisoning, caused by a toxic mold growing on rye, might have triggered hallucinations and spasms that looked like dancing. Others point to psychological stress or religious fervor as possible causes. Imagine trying to explain that to a terrified crowd with no science to lean on, only prayers and fear. Historians still argue whether the Dancing Plague was primarily a neurological condition, mass psychogenic illness, or something else entirely. The truth remains as elusive as the endless spinning feet. You picture the scene. Men and women, faces flushed with exertion, twirling through the streets with wild eyes, some collapsing, others urging each other on. Clerics try to intervene with prayers, while villagers watch in horror and confusion. The boundaries between disease, madness, and magic blur into a chaotic dance. The Dancing Plague reminds you that medieval medicine wasn't just about treating the body, but also grappling with the mysteries of the mind and spirit. It's a strange, haunting episode that leaves you wondering how much of illness is physical and how much is the invisible weight of fear and belief. As the dancing fades into the night, you feel the restless energy settle, replaced by a quiet, uneasy calm that carries you deeper into the strange world of medieval maladies. You inhale deeply as you step into a fog-filled street, the damp chill settling in your bones. The air feels thick and heavy, almost as if it's carrying a tangible weight of sickness. Welcome to the era of miasma, the medieval theory that bad air, or corrupted, foul-smelling breath of the earth, was the invisible agent spreading disease. People believed that disease traveled not through touch or tiny creatures, but through the very atmosphere itself. It's a concept that shaped how cities were built, how people behaved, and how magic was woven into medicine. A key historical fact here: The miasma theory dominated Western medicine well into the 19th century, centuries after the plague. It explained epidemics with the logic that stinky swamps, rotting garbage, and foul smells could poison the air and make people sick. Hence, people took to carrying fragrant herbs, lighting fires, or even ringing bells to cleanse the atmosphere around them. You can imagine the odd mix of practicality and superstition as towns tried to mask the stench of illness and death. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval cities instituted night watchmen, tasked with patrolling the streets, carrying torches or burning incense to disperse the miasma. This wasn't just a safety measure, it was an early form of air purification based on belief. The Watchers' slow, eerie patrols must have felt part solemn duty, part magical ritual. Historians still argue whether belief in miasma might have inadvertently helped limit disease spread by encouraging people to avoid stagnant, crowded, and dirty places, even if the true culprit was microscopic bacteria. It's one of those fascinating cases where a wrong theory produced some right outcomes, like a lucky guess. As you wander through the market square, you see people holding posies of flowers and bundles of dried herbs, roses, lavender, and rue, stuffed into their clothes or sniffed repeatedly. These were more than just pleasant smells. They were considered shields against the invisible poison in the air. The scent of rosemary mixed with the acrid tang of burnt wood creates a strange sensory cocktail, both soothing and unsettling. The magical thinking around miasma influenced rituals and healing practices too. Priests and healers would bless the air, perform exorcisms, or burn incense in the hope of driving out the unseen evil. Disease was not only a physical affliction, but a spiritual invasion. This belief made the invisible very real and terrifying. You might chuckle to think how many times today's modern air freshener owes its ancestor to medieval miasma cures, humanity's long-standing battle against bad smells, and the invisible threats they were thought to carry. As the fog thins, you carry forward the scent of ancient beliefs mingled with desperation and hope, stepping deeper into the intertwined worlds of disease and magic. You wander into a cluttered apothecary shop tucked between timbered houses, its shelves laden with dusty jars, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and curious objects that seem half scientific, half mystical. Here, the worlds of charms, amulets, and medicine collide in a dance as old as fear itself. People clutched tiny bags called talismans, filled with bits of bone, fragrant herbs, or prayers written on scraps of parchment, all believed to ward off illness and bad luck. You watch a customer hesitantly pick up a necklace rumored to protect against the plague, fingers brushing over ancient symbols that shimmer faintly in the candlelight. A historical fact to settle into. Amulets and charms were a staple of medieval medicine and folk belief. They were thought to create a protective barrier between the wearer and the unseen forces causing disease. From crosses blessed by priests to stones carved with mysterious runes, these objects carried both spiritual and practical weight. People didn't just seek a cure, they sought protection from the unknown. Here's a quirky detail. Some charms were downright bizarre, like dried toads tied to cords, supposed to suck sickness out of the body, or little bags filled with ground-up mummy dust, believed to have magical healing powers. The idea that ancient remains could hold mystical potency might sound strange today, but in medieval minds, it made perfect sense. Historians still argue whether charms had any real impact beyond psychological comfort. Did these objects genuinely influence health by boosting morale? Or were they just harmless superstition? It's a fuzzy area where faith and medicine overlap, and where placebo effects might have been powerful indeed. As you look around, you notice that these charms often blended Christian symbols with older pagan signs, creating a patchwork of belief that reflected the turbulent religious and cultural mix of the time. A rosary might hang beside a carved horn, each believed to hold its own kind of power. You picture a mother tying a charm to her child's wrist before sending them to school, or a traveler clutching a pendant against a plague-ridden town, hoping to keep the darkness at bay. These small tokens carried immense hope, tiny shields in a dangerous world. Even today, you might recognize echoes of this medieval blend in modern superstitions. Lucky coins, protective jewelry, and that quirky habit of knocking on wood. The human desire to control the uncontrollable remains unchanged. a timeless dance of fear and faith. The scent of dried herbs and the flicker of candlelight wrap around you as you step out of the apothecary. The weight of ancient hopes still lingering on your skin, you slip through a heavy oak door into a quiet, shadowed monastery, where rows of monks sit hunched over parchment, their quills scratching out knowledge that might save lives, or at least try to. Monasteries in medieval Europe weren't just places of prayer, they were centers of learning, where medical texts from ancient Greece, Rome, and the Islamic world were copied, preserved, and sometimes improved. The monks acted as early doctors, apothecaries, and even magical protectors of health, blending science and faith in a way that still fascinates scholars today. Here's a straightforward historical fact. Monasteries housed some of the earliest hospitals and infirmaries in Europe, often attached to their religious institutions. Monks compiled herbals, books describing medicinal plants, and even experimented with remedies, providing care to both the sick and the poor. Their work laid important groundwork for later medical advances. On the quirkier side, these monks sometimes included mystical elements in their healing. They believed that healing was not only physical, but spiritual, so prayers, blessings, and holy relics played a role alongside herbs and poultices. You might imagine a monk carefully reciting psalms over a jar of salve, hoping to imbue it with divine power. Healing was as much about faith as it was about ingredients. Historians still argue whether monastic medicine was more effective because of its spiritual component, or simply because monks preserved important medical knowledge when much of Europe's secular expertise was lost. Did the prayers make a difference? Or was it the careful copying of texts? Probably a bit of both, tangled in a world where science and magic weren't yet separate paths. As you move through the cool, candlelit cloisters, you see shelves lined with dusty tomes and jars labeled in Latin, filled with dried plants and strange powders. The monks were the medieval equivalent of scholars, pharmacists, and spiritual guides rolled into one, keepers of knowledge who walked the line between earthly science and divine mystery. The calm, quiet atmosphere contrasts sharply with the chaotic, fearful world outside these stone walls. A place where illness was rampant, and magic and medicine were inseparable allies in the fight against death. You leave the monastery feeling a deep respect for these learned caretakers, who navigated a complex world of superstition, faith, and emerging science, preserving fragments of wisdom that would survive centuries of darkness. You find yourself squinting against the midday sun, the sharp, salty scent of the Nile on the breeze as you watch a healer spread a thick, oddly textured paste across the exposed skin of a traveler. This isn't just any salve, it's crocodile dung, a treatment so bizarre it sounds like a prank, yet was genuinely used in medieval medicine. The traveler winces, the strange mixture promising protection from the sun's harsh rays and maybe even warding off disease. You probably wouldn't volunteer for this sunscreen, but in a world where science was entangled with magic and tradition, it made sense. A solid historical fact to hold on to. Ancient Egyptian and medieval physicians did, in fact, use crocodile dung in some medicinal remedies, including as a topical treatment. While it might make you recoil today, it reflects a belief in natural substances' mystical and healing powers. The dung was thought to have cooling properties and magical protection, a potent combo against illness and injury. On the quirkier side, some believed that mixing such ingredients with prayers or chants amplified their effects, blending physical treatment with ritual magic. It's a reminder that medieval medicine wasn't just about herbs and potions, it was an entire spiritual and sensory experience. Historians still argue whether these odd treatments were genuinely effective or simply placebo bolstered by ritual. Did crocodile dung actually protect against sunburn or infection? Probably not. But the ritual gave people hope and a sense of control in a confusing world. Imagine the healer carefully applying the paste, murmuring incantations, while the patient sits patiently, covered in the odd smell of drying dung and herbs. It's a scene both surreal and strangely human. People doing what they must to survive. This peculiar sunscreen is just one example of how medieval medicine borrowed from older traditions and wove magic and natural lore into daily healing. The overlap of faith, folklore, and science creates a rich tapestry that makes the past both alien and strangely familiar. As you wipe the imagined residue from your skin and step away, you carry with you a reminder that sometimes survival meant embracing the bizarre and the magical, whether or not it truly worked. You trudge through a foggy, deserted street where a figure looms ahead, cloaked in a long dark robe and wearing a bird-like mask with a long, curved beak. The infamous plague doctor. This eerie costume, part protection, part performance, has become an icon of medieval medicine and mystery. You can almost hear the muted steps on the cobblestones and feel the chilling mix of hope and fear that surrounded these doctors as they confronted death face to face. Here's a straightforward historical fact. The beak mask was stuffed with aromatic herbs like lavender, mint, and cloves, intended to filter out the bad air believed to carry the plague. The long robe was waxed to repel bodily fluids, and the wide-brimmed hat signaled the wearer's medical status. This outfit was one of the earliest attempts at personal protective equipment, blending superstition, practical ideas, and a bit of showmanship. A quirky tidbit. The mask's design may also have served to intimidate onlookers or reassure patients, turning the doctor into a living symbol of authority and mystical power. The bird beak was, in a way, a walking talisman against disease, as much psychological as physical. Historians still argue whether plague doctors' gear actually provided any real protection, or was mostly a comforting illusion. Did the herbs in the beak mask filter out germs? Modern science says no, but the gear probably helped keep doctors at a slight distance from infected patients, which might have saved some lives. You picture the doctor moving methodically through crowded, sick-filled rooms, their beak mask twitching with every breath, hands steady despite the chaos around them. Some patients found solace in their presence. Others, just more fear. The plague doctor's appearance was as much about managing panic as it was about curing disease. This strange costume blends medicine, magic, and theater, reminding you that healing has often involved not just the body but also the mind and the power of symbols. As the fog thickens and you leave the street behind, you carry with you the eerie image of those masked figures, part savior, part harbinger of death, forever etched into the story of medieval medicine. You step into a flickering, candlelit chapel, where the air smells faintly of incense and damp stone. A tense crowd gathers as a priest begins a ritual, his voice low but urgent, calling upon divine power to expel a demon believed to be the cause of a man's violent shaking and fever. In medieval Europe, illness and demonic possession were often tangled together, making priests both doctors and exorcists. Here, healing wasn't just about the body, it was a battle for the soul, a key historical fact. Clergy often acted as the first line of defense against mysterious illnesses, performing exorcisms or prayers alongside herbal remedies. The church held immense authority, and spiritual causes for disease were widely accepted. If science was a candle flickering in the dark, faith was the roaring fire. On the quirkier side, some exorcisms included bizarre rituals, chanting in strange languages, the use of holy water sprinkled in odd patterns, or the drawing of protective circles. Sometimes, symptoms like epilepsy or mental illness were mistaken for possession, leading to intense and sometimes dangerous interventions. Historians still argue whether these spiritual treatments sometimes provided psychological relief, or if they simply prolonged suffering by ignoring physical causes. Did faith heal, or did it just offer hope when none existed? The boundary remains blurry. You imagine the terrified patient, writhing as the priest chants, the congregation watching in a mix of fear and hope. The room is thick with tension, a place where medicine and magic merge. This is a world where illness is not only a bodily affliction, but a cosmic battle against unseen forces. The intertwining of demons and disease reflects how deeply spiritual beliefs shaped medieval medicine. Healing was as much about faith and exorcism as it was about herbs and bloodletting. As you leave the chapel's flickering shadows, you carry the haunting sense that in this era, the invisible forces were as deadly as any pestilence, and battling them required more than medicine. It needed magic, ritual, and belief. You find yourself wandering through a dense, dew-laden forest just as dawn breaks, the soft rustle of leaves mingling with the chirping of birds. All around you, green leaves and wildflowers beckon with whispered promises of healing. Herbs were the backbone of medieval medicine, but they were no mere plants. They were tiny vessels of magic and mystery. To the medieval mind, each herb held not only physical power, but also spiritual significance, capable of both healing and harm depending on how it was used. Here's a solid historical fact. Many common medieval remedies were based on herbalism, with plants like chamomile, valerian, and lavender, used to soothe ailments ranging from headaches to stomach troubles. The knowledge of these herbs was painstakingly recorded in herbals, often written by monks in monasteries, preserving ancient wisdom. A quirky detail: some herbs were so feared for their potency that their use was restricted or surrounded by superstitions. Mandrake, for example, was believed to scream when uprooted, capable of killing anyone who heard it. Belladonna, known as deadly nightshade, could cause hallucinations or death if misused. You can almost hear the cautious whispers around the market stalls as healers handled these plants with a mix of reverence and fear. Historians still argue whether medieval herbalists had more effective knowledge than we give them credit for, or if much of their practice was simply trial and error wrapped in superstition. Some plants undoubtedly had medicinal properties. Others were more placebo or poison. The truth lies somewhere between science and magic. You imagine a healer kneeling by a garden bed, carefully gathering leaves and roots, whispering prayers or incantations to awaken the plant's spirit. The ritual of harvesting was as important as the plant itself, blending the natural with the supernatural. This green magic of herbs formed a bridge between the worlds of science, faith, and folklore. Each leaf was a tiny promise, a flicker of hope amid the darkness of disease. As you step away, the fresh scent of herbs lingers on your skin, a reminder that healing was, and always will be, an art entwined with mystery and belief. You tilt your head back and gaze upward into the twilight sky, where shimmering stars and wandering planets slowly trace their paths across the heavens. In medieval times, the cosmos wasn't just a distant spectacle. It was a living map influencing the very rhythms of your body and health. Medical astrology was woven into the fabric of medieval healing, linking the positions of stars and planets with diagnoses and treatments. To the medieval mind, the stars guided not only fate, but also the flow of humors and the timing of cures. Here's a historical fact. Physicians often consulted astrological charts before performing treatments, believing that the phases of the moon, the positions of Jupiter or Mars, and the alignment of constellations could affect the success of bloodletting or the potency of a potion. Medical texts included elaborate tables correlating zodiac signs to parts of the body. Aries ruled the head, Scorpio the reproductive organs. Timing was everything. On the quirky side, some treatments involved waiting for a specific celestial event to begin, such as a particular planetary conjunction, to maximize effectiveness. Imagine scheduling your bloodletting appointment based on when Venus was in retrograde. Talk about astrology appointments ahead of their time. Historians still argue whether medical astrology was merely a comforting framework in an uncertain world, or if it actually had any beneficial effects on treatment outcomes. Was it placebo or genuine cosmic influence? The jury is still out. You picture a medieval doctor poring over dusty star charts by candlelight, calculating the best moment to treat a patient, while the patient lies waiting with a mix of hope and skepticism. The interplay between the heavens and the human body forms a poetic link between microcosm and macrocosm, a universe inside and out. The idea that the stars could heal or harm ties neatly into the broader medieval belief that disease wasn't random, but part of a grand cosmic order. It's a view that blends magic, faith, and early science in a way that still sparks wonder. As you return your gaze from the heavens to the earth below, you carry with you the sense that healing was not only a matter of herbs and blood, but also the silent music of the spheres guiding each fragile life. You find yourself standing at the edge of a bustling port city, the salty breeze mingling with the sharp scent of wood smoke and fish. The year is 1377, and Venice is locked in a desperate battle against the invisible enemy, the plague. Here, in this watery labyrinth of canals and crowded streets, the city pioneers a strange and cautious new system: quarantine. Ships arriving from infected ports were held isolated for 40 days, a word that comes from the Italian quaranta giorni. It's a practical, if peculiar, approach born from fear and a desperate hope to stop the spread of disease. A key historical fact: Venice was among the first places to implement organized quarantine measures during plague outbreaks, establishing lazarettos, isolation islands where sailors and goods could be held safely away from the population. This system slowed contagion and influenced public health measures for centuries to come. Here's a quirky twist. The 40-day period might have been inspired as much by biblical symbolism as by medical observation. 40 is a recurring number in Scripture. 40 days of flood, 40 days in the wilderness, and likely lent a mystical weight to the practice. You can almost picture officials counting down the days with a mix of dread and superstition. Historians still argue whether quarantine was more effective because of its timing and isolation, or if it worked simply because it separated the sick and healthy physically. An idea ahead of its time, but still wrapped in medieval ritual. It's a fascinating example of how logic and superstition can dance together in the face of catastrophe. You imagine weary sailors disembarking onto a bleak island, guarded by stern officials, cut off from the world while they wait out their fate. It's a lonely limbo, where hope and fear mingle in every breath of salty air. Meanwhile, merchants and citizens anxiously watch, clinging to rumors and prayers. The Venetian quarantine reflects a growing, if cautious, recognition that disease is contagious and requires isolation, not just prayers or charms. Yet it's still deeply embedded in a worldview where religious meaning and practical necessity entwine. As you step back onto the bustling dock, you carry the sense that quarantine was a strange but important bridge, linking medieval magic with emerging public health and laying groundwork for the modern fight against epidemics. You settle into the flickering candlelight of a scriptorium, the quiet scratch of quills filling the air as scribes copy ancient texts onto fragile parchment. These manuscripts are more than just medical manuals. They're a curious blend of science and spellcraft, where carefully drawn diagrams sit beside incantations and prayers. Medieval medical texts were fascinating hybrids, half science, half magic, crafted to guide healers through a mysterious and often hostile world. A historical fact to hold close. Many medieval medical books included detailed anatomical drawings, herbal recipes, and surgical instructions alongside charms, amulets, and spells meant to protect against evil spirits. This mix reflected the belief that both physical and supernatural forces influenced health. Here's a quirky detail. Some manuscripts featured magical words written in strange alphabets or backward script meant to confuse malevolent spirits or amplify the power of a remedy. Imagine a healer whispering cryptic phrases while preparing a poultice, the words carrying as much weight as the herbs themselves. Historians still argue whether these magical elements were purely symbolic or if they played an active role in medieval medicine. Did the rituals enhance the effectiveness of treatments by boosting patient morale? Or were they a form of early psychological therapy? The line between placebo and magic is delightfully blurred. You picture a monk or healer poring over these manuscripts, balancing scientific curiosity with deep faith. The scribes were the guardians of knowledge, preserving not only medical wisdom, but also the spiritual armor patients needed to face illness. This mingling of text and talisman shows how medieval medicine was a holistic practice, an art as much about comforting the soul as treating the body. As you close the heavy book and blow out the candle, the faint glow lingers, just like the intertwined shadows of magic and medicine that shaped an era's fragile hopes for healing. You step quietly into a small, rustic cottage where a woman moves with practiced grace, surrounded by the scent of drying herbs and the soft clatter of wooden bowls. This woman is a midwife and a healer, part of a long tradition of wise women who held vital knowledge of childbirth, herbs, and the mysterious art of healing. But her role is a precarious one. Revered by some, feared and accused by others, and in medieval society, women like her walked a fine line between respect and suspicion, caught between the worlds of medicine and magic. Here's a historical fact. Midwives were essential caregivers, especially in childbirth before hospitals existed. They used herbal remedies and practical knowledge passed down through generations, often serving women who had no access to male physicians. Despite their crucial role, many midwives faced accusations of witchcraft, especially during times of crisis. A quirky tidbit. Some midwives carried charms or recited prayers believed to protect mother and child, blending physical care with spiritual protection. They might use a mixture of blessed water, herbal oils, and whispered incantations, practices that today might seem like a comforting ritual but then could mean the difference between life and death. Historians still argue whether midwives were primarily victims of misogyny or whether some truly practiced folk magic that unsettled authorities. The reality was complex, woven with fear, respect, and the desperate hope to protect life in a dangerous world. You imagine the midwife bending over a laboring woman, her hands steady and gentle, her voice a low chant that both soothes and invokes unseen powers. Her knowledge is a blend of science, tradition, and a touch of magic, held together by community trust and whispered secrets. As you leave the cottage, the scent of herbs lingers in the air, a subtle reminder of the women who carried the fragile hopes of birth and healing through the fog of superstition and fear. You find yourself in a dimly lit room where the walls echo faintly with the sounds of muffled breathing and distant whispers. In the center, a patient lies on a rough wooden bench, while a healer carefully prepares a primitive drill. The practice is trepanning, drilling a hole in the skull, a surgical intervention believed to release evil spirits or relieve pressure. It's a brutal, yet surprisingly ancient form of brain magic that persisted for centuries, despite the obvious risks. Here's a concrete historical fact. Trepanning is one of the oldest surgical procedures known, with evidence dating back thousands of years, and it remained in use throughout the Middle Ages. While it might seem barbaric, some patients survived, and it was seen as a last hope against mysterious illnesses like seizures, mental disorders, or headaches. On the quirky side, trepanning wasn't just a physical operation. It was loaded with ritual. The process might include prayers, incantations, and the use of magical symbols carved near the incision site. The healer was part surgeon, part magician, attempting to open a gateway for trapped spirits to escape. Historians still argue whether trepanning's success rates were really about releasing spirits or just the relief of pressure from skull injuries. Some believe the procedure was occasionally effective for certain head traumas, while others see it as primarily a spiritual act. The debate weaves medicine and magic into an uneasy knot. You imagine the patient's grimace, the cold metal biting into bone, the healer chanting softly, hands steady despite the precarious task. The procedure was as much a test of faith as of skill, a desperate attempt to conquer both the seen and unseen. This strange blend of surgery and sorcery reminds you how medieval medicine straddled a razor's edge, where the physical and mystical met in the hopes of healing a troubled mind and body. As you leave the room, the echoes fade, but the lingering question remains. Was trepanning an ancient magic or a crude precursor to modern neurosurgery? You step through the remnants of a once bustling town recovering from devastation. The air carries a mixture of hope and cautious renewal. The plague's shadow has lifted, but its lessons hang heavy. Society, shattered and shaken, begins to rebuild, reshaping how people understand illness and healing. The dark age of superstition doesn't vanish overnight, but the seeds of change, science, observation, and public health are slowly taking root. Medicine begins to turn a tentative corner, influenced by the trauma and upheaval the plague left behind. Here's a clear historical fact. The aftermath of the Black Death accelerated medical knowledge and public health practices. The drastic loss of life created shortages of labor and shifted economic and social structures, forcing a reconsideration of old ideas and opening the door to Renaissance innovations. A quirky note. Some plague survivors adopted strange behaviors believed to protect them from future illness, wearing certain colors, avoiding crowded places, or carrying specific herbs and amulets. These customs, blending the old and the new, show how deeply superstition was woven into everyday life, even as rational thought gained ground. Historians still argue how much the plague truly advanced medicine versus simply accelerating social change. Did new ideas emerge because of necessity? Or was it a gradual evolution punctuated by tragedy? This debate underscores the complex interplay of fear, knowledge, and human resilience. You picture a weary doctor carefully documenting symptoms in a worn notebook, a hopeful student eager to learn, or a town council debating sanitation improvements. The slow shift from magic to medicine is palpable, a fragile, uneven progression fueled by curiosity and desperation. The plague's aftermath is not just a story of death, but of transformation, where old beliefs are questioned, and the first flickers of modern science begin to glow. It's a reminder that even the darkest times can spark light. As you walk through the recovering town, you feel the quiet hum of change, a subtle but powerful pulse beneath the surface of medieval life. You drift into a quiet evening where the shadows lengthen and the world seems to slow. The legacy of medieval medicine and magic lingers like a faint perfume, strange, compelling, and surprisingly resilient. Though centuries have passed, the echoes of old beliefs, rituals, and remedies ripple through time, weaving into modern medicine and culture in unexpected ways. The weirdness of the past isn't gone. It's folded into the fabric of today's healing practices, stories, and superstitions. Here's a solid historical fact to ground you. Many modern medical practices, like quarantine and the use of herbal remedies, have roots in medieval times, evolving through trial, error, and a mix of science and belief. The early blending of magic and medicine laid foundational stones for what would become evidence-based practice, even if that foundation was built on some quirky, questionable traditions. A quirky tidbit. Some modern alternative remedies still echo medieval superstition. Amulets for protection, herbal tinctures, and rituals that mirror old charms. You might smile to think that the idea of carrying a lucky charm to ward off illness has been around longer than most people imagine. Historians still argue how much medieval medicine deserves credit for modern advances. Was it the cradle of scientific progress, or a long detour through myth and magic? The answer, as always, is both. A complex, fascinating journey shaped by human hope and ingenuity. You picture the past and present intertwined, a medieval healer's chant mingling with a modern doctor's steady voice, a dried herb alongside a pharmaceutical pill. The strange dance between magic and medicine continues in new forms, a testament to humanity's endless quest to understand and conquer illness. Now, as the night deepens and your eyelids grow heavy, you feel the comforting hum of history's lessons settling softly around you. The past's shadows fade, leaving only gentle whispers and the quiet promise of